super excited. We'll give it a couple more minutes. Thanks everybody who just joined in. We're going to get started in a couple minutes. We're waiting for a few more to file in here, but thanks so much for jumping on. Excited to talk with you guys today. Anyone have any favorite sessions, takeaways, lessons, action items from today? Love to hear about it in the chat.
All right, so we're at 1:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. So we'd like to thank you so much for joining us for Tenbound's first ever virtual conference. And we would like to thank Julianne for giving us a presentation today and for all of you who are here. And then also just a couple housekeeping things. We are recording the session. So if you don't want to be seen, just turn off your camera, and we ask that you turn off your microphone too. We are taking questions in the chat box, and I'll go ahead and feed it over to Julianne. I'm sure she would love to answer all your burning questions at the very end. But without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce Julianne Thompson from Drift, who will talk about scaling an SDR team in 2020.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Vivian. Hey, everybody. Thanks for hopping in today. Hope you have had a fantastic virtual event so far, and have gained some good takeaways as well. And so hopefully you'll get some from this presentation. So a little background on myself, for those of you I have not met. So I actually started my career as an SDR myself, that I built out a recruiting department where we were focusing on sales development shops at other companies. And then I started an SDR shop at a startup called Kite Desk. And then from there, I moved over to outreach, where I built out the Tampa SDR team for outreach. And in the last 90 days, I have joined Drift. And so as you can tell, I like the building aspect. And so when I heard that Drift was opening a Tampa office, I knew I had to take advantage of the time and the timing, and being able to join such an incredible company, one that I've had a brand crush on essentially since its inception. So I was really excited to start. My first day was on March 20th. And so if you do the math backwards, that is right when COVID hit. And so on top of adjusting to this new normal on a personal level and, getting all my family situated, I also started a new job at a new company with a new team, none of which I've met in person even to this day, and most of which were still actually on ramp. So here's the challenge that I faced is, well, I'm sure that many of you are in the same boat in this. Like, SDRs are typically earlier in their career. They don't have as much tenure, and sometimes can be very needy. And I don't mean this in a bad way. And I say that because I used to be that needy person. When I was an SDR, my boss told me, hey, you can ask me questions at 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. because if I just let you do this all day, you're never going to get any work done. Because there's a lot of things that you need to teach them. It's very difficult to do that in a remote environment. So I wanted to take that into consideration when I moved into a team that was completely remote. So 70% of my team has been in a Drift office for less than a month. So just to put some of that into perspective, that's what we walked into. And so spoiler alert, in the last 90 days, things are going really well. And we're building and we're learning and we're growing. We've still got a ton of work to do on the SDR front, but we've gotten off to a hell of a start. So super excited about what the team's done so far. I realize that not everybody is scaling a team right now, and understand that that's not the situation for everybody. But what I wanted to do today is just walk through some of those foundational rocks that we put into place in the last 90 days to help grow our team during this time. And my hope here is that you can leave with one or two of these that you can take back to your team and help you grow your team, and not necessarily from a quantity perspective, going from 4 to 14 in 2020, but also from a professional growth perspective. All right, so here are the 5 keys to, I'm losing my screen here, give me a second. Here are the 5 keys to scaling an SDR team in 2020. So we're going to walk through each of these. So don't feel like you need to write them all down right now or anything. The first thing we want to do is make sure that we align with our sales counterparts. We're going to talk about a couple ways that we made that happen. Second is we wanted to make sure that we evaluated the multi-channel strategy that we had so we could take a look at what had been working with the 4 SDRs that we had previously, and then capitalized on some of those gaps that we might be able to improve. And then third, I'm a big funnel person. So if you've been on my LinkedIn page before, you've probably read my blog, Managing by Metrics. So we're going to talk through that. And then I'm also very focused on the development of your reps. And then something that's been really interesting to me in the last 90 days was different sources of motivation for the team. So we'll walk through those things. All right, we're going to start off with aligning with the sales team. So if you visited Drift's virtual booth earlier, you may have heard me talk about this a little bit. So when I first came into Drift, this was the old model on the left here. And so what you see here is that you've got a single SDR supporting multiple AEs. And so the issue with the great thing about this model, we'll start with that, is there's a good relationship here, right? And so the AE is able to kind of help, coach, mentor the SDR. The SDR gets a really good feel for what the specific AE wants, but it's got a few downfalls that we'll talk about too. And so the issue with this is SDR1 got promoted. And so that should be a really good thing. The entire company is celebrating. The problem is AE1 and 2 were not super happy about that. Of course, they were happy about his development and his career path, but all of a sudden their pipeline was wiped. So we moved to this new model that you can see on the right. And so every line represents a relationship. So there is a point of this that there are multiple relationships now managed. But then take a look at the first AE on this list. Now they're supported by 3 different SDRs. So you can think about this as diversifying your portfolio so that all of the AE's pipeline doesn't rely on a single SDR, and instead it's spread across. And then from the SDR's perspective, they're now learning from 4 or 5 different AEs because we all know everybody has different selling styles. So it's important to be able to take a look at different types of selling styles when you're an SDR so that you can learn about what works best for you. All right. SDR and AE huddle. So we talked about this a little bit too in the Drift virtual booth if you were able to attend earlier. So one of the things that we were coming across was the concern that the SDRs and AEs would lose the relationship. And so what we did is we took the SDRs and the AEs that had the most successful relationships and we asked them, hey, what do you cover during your one-on-ones? What are the things that are most important for you to take a look at every week together? And so what we decided is every week when they have their one-on-one, the AE is going to bring in 5 companies. I'm just giving you an example of what one of them would look like here. And then the SDR and the AE will work together to determine within those 5 target accounts that they're focusing on that week, who are we going to be reaching out to? What's the names and the titles? Is it somebody that's in sequence yet? And so this would look like a little checkbox that they would go in and check off. Is the SDR or the AE responsible for the outreach? We do believe in tandem prospecting, which means approaching the account at the same time so that you have the SDR putting in a lot of the quantity. They're making the cold calls, they're sending more emails, and then the AE can really nicely layer in some personalization there. And we'll talk a lot more about personalization in a few, but we want to make sure we understand very clearly who's responsible for what. And then we can also track what meetings were booked, what meetings were held, if an opportunity was created. And they keep a running list of this throughout their relationship. So the AE and SDR managers can anytime pop in there and say, hey, what's going on with this account? All of these slides can make available to you too. So if you're interested in seeing this template, we can make that happen for you. All right, I'm not going to walk through all of these, but one of the things that was most important is making sure that we had proper alignment with the AE team in terms of expectations. So what are SDRs paid to do? They're paid to create opportunities. And so one thing that I've noticed just in my career and working with other sales development leaders is sometimes there's this friction between the SDR and the AE team because it's codependent, right? So the SDR relies on the AE to create the opportunity so that they get paid. And the AE relies on the SDR to be awesome at their job and create awesome pipeline for them. And so it's really important from the start to have clear expectations on what a meeting should look like. And so an SDR should never schedule a meeting unless it hits one of these three criteria. These are the ones that we use, might not necessarily be the ones that you guys should use, but you should have very clearly defined expectations for when you should set a meeting. And then the opportunity creation criteria, those are sometimes things that we don't know before the discovery call. And so it's okay if an SDR schedules the meeting and it's somebody that doesn't have authority, as long as they're in a role that typically we would work with. And in pain point, those types of things you can get out a little bit in the cold call or the email or through your research. But a lot of times that's really discovered during the discovery. So at that point, that if all three of these boxes are checked, that's when the AE would know to create an opportunity. So I would definitely encourage you to align with your team if you don't have some type of opportunity creation criteria yet. All right, on to the next, multi-channel approaches. So one thing that I've done throughout my career is really focused on different channels to reach the buyer. And then also, and this has happened in the last 3 or 4 years since account-based prospecting has become a much bigger deal, is prioritizing your accounts. And so what I recommend here is have your hit list of accounts. So each AE should have about 20 accounts at any given time. And sometimes those accounts can move, right? So sometimes you can go after these 20, but let's say you have an open opportunity with these 3, you should file in 3 more so that you always have a list of about 20 hit list accounts. And then the next layer out is the ICP. And so those are exactly what they sound like, your ICP. So those are your bread and butter. You know, we can do business with these kinds of companies, whether that's based on size, industry, location, those types of demographic information. And then the last piece, and I think sometimes this is overly ignored, is the testing zone. And so if you're in a hyper growth company or even a growing company that hasn't necessarily figured out what that ICP should be, you should still be prospecting into your testing zone. But we're going to do that a little bit differently, which I'll show you here in a second. All right, so beyond prospecting or defining your accounts into those 3 different tiers, I also recommend putting your personas into 3 different tiers. So you want to define between 3 and 5 personas based on your market segment that you want to target. You want to understand the messaging. Could do a whole different conversation on persona-based messaging, but you'll hear me talk about it a little bit here. So in that first tier, you want to be highly manual, very personalized, heavy on the research. We're looking at financial statements. We're reading blogs of people that have written content. We're sending them packages. We're writing them handwritten letters. Like those are your account-based or target account or hit list accounts. And so there should be a lot of care and nurture that goes into those accounts. You should never send these people an automated email. Tier 2, you're still doing personalized emails. We're still making phone calls. We're still doing research. And it was an earlier session today. They were talking about if you write an email, 20% of it should be personalized. So you don't have to personalize the whole email, but you should personalize 20% of it. You can start working in a little bit of automation here, but still these are very high value targets. So we don't want to, you don't want to spam or blast or anything along those lines. And then what do you do with tier 3? And so it never makes sense to just send an email that says, this is what my company does. Do you want to have a meeting? And instead, what we do with tier 3 is personalization at scale through persona-based messaging. So what this would look like is, hey, I see you're a CMO at ABC company. And typically when we speak with other CMOs like you in your position, these are the areas that they're focused on. These are the challenges that they're having. Let's schedule some time to talk about how we can help you drive X measurable. And so that still feels very personal because you're talking about challenges that they solve, but you can send that same message to multiple people. All right, why personalization matters. I think the formatting here got a little messed up, but what I wanted to highlight here, so I've been at Drift for 90 days. Never have I worked for a company that gets so much credit on LinkedIn from prospects. And so like these are prospects coming in and saying, hey, really great job. I never respond to these, but this set certainly warranted it. In between sessions, I got a message from one of the reps on my team that said the prospect sent him a video back and was like, "What a great video experience!" So it really does matter, and it also depends on it also helps fuel your personal brand and your company's brand as well. All right, running up on time a little bit, so I'm going to run through the next couple of slides a little quicker than I was anticipating, but I want to make sure we have some time for some questions at the end here. So the SDR conversion funnel, I could talk about this for the next hour, so this is something I'm super passionate about. So these are some of the numbers on the left here. Basically what we want to look at is the funnel of what activity does it take to get to your quota. And that way it's, when you're an SDR and you're looking at your quota, it's like, man, how am I going to get 12 opportunities a month? And sometimes it can be very overwhelming. So we want to make sure that we know how to break that down for each person. So you want to start with your team's funnel. What does your funnel look like today? How many calls does it take to get into how many conversations, to get how many meetings booked, to have how many hold, to have how many opportunities created? Understand what your team's funnel looks like today, and then take a look at what your goals are for the month, quarter, or year, and say, are we in a position to hit our number based on this? If not, where can we move the needle? And so an example of this could be, hey, our hold rate is down. If everything else is the same, we need to get our hold rate up, we'll hit our number. So then that's the behavior that you focus on. And then what you should do is measure each rep individually against those, and have that be a part of your one-on-one session with them, where you're talking to them about the things that they can improve on, and you bring data to those conversations. So by using this funnel, that eliminates the conversation that you'll have with somebody about, hey, I'm not hitting my number, but I don't know why. This will tell you exactly why. The only thing I want to highlight on this before we move on to is I'm using calls here as a KPI. It is not the only KPI. Gone are the days of, you have to make X amount of dials to hit your number. It is about that omni-channel approach that we talked about. It's doing the research. It's writing personalized emails. It's following up those emails with persona-based messaging, and it is making the phone calls in between. So I don't want this slide to be deceiving to you to think that that's the only activity that you can do. You should be making all kinds of activities. All right, developing reps. So this is something I'm very passionate about. So training, practicing, and measuring. It's not enough to just train your reps. We need to make sure that you're also have time to practice, and then also measure for knowledge retention. This next slide, I actually have an extended version of this in the appendix. So please take a look at this if you're looking to implement a training schedule. So what we do is every month we identify a behavior that we're trying to drive. And then on Monday, we train on that specific behavior. Tuesday, we do a drill. Wednesday, we do a drill. Thursday, we do a drill. And then Friday, we measure on that. If you're having trouble keeping things fresh and giving them different types of ways to learn, please check out the slides. I've baked out an entire month session that we did, and it's got a lot of different ideas. Also, please feel free to reach out to me. I love to hear new ideas on this too, but it is important to invest in them. And then as far as the development goes too, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of SDRs aren't interested in being SDRs for the rest of their life. This is a model that you can use. There is an extended version also in the appendix of the SDR lifecycle, but these micro promotions allow them to keep chasing the next step in their career so that you don't get caught in the monotony of the job, because it is really easy to say, okay, I got to pick up the phone 50 more times today, 60 more times tomorrow. So it is important to make sure that they understand that they are moving forward, giving them more responsibility and giving them more learning opportunities along the way. In addition to that too, it's important to have baked out career tracks. So it shouldn't just be, you're an AE, you're bust, right? And even if you don't have opportunities for SDRs to move into leadership right away at your company or into post-sales right away at your company, it is important for you to help them understand like what it is that they want to do in their career and what skills they should need and what activities they can do to practice those skills. And then of course, who they should be talking with internally to help reach those goals. All right, motivation. We'll make this quick too. I definitely want to get to some questions. We've got a couple in there, but so 5 sources of motivation. When I first started at Drift, I asked the SDR team to rank these 5 sources of motivation to see what was most important to them. And surprisingly somewhat, but by far, the number one thing that they were focused on was professional development. And so when you think about motivation, a lot of times you think about like competitions and contests and even recognition, but ask your team what's important to them and why they feel motivated. And so one thing that we do here is provide stretch projects. So the top performer on my team, he loves to get involved in our sequence creation. And so because he's a top performer, I give him that extra responsibility. I thank him for his work. And then as a result, the emails that he's doing such a great job of sending to his prospects that have resulted in him being a top performer are now being used across the entire team. And so by having somebody step up and be an area captain or giving them this stretch projects is a huge source of motivation. And then you can also do this the other way too. So let's say that you have somebody that's struggling with something. I'll give you an example that I used at my last company. We had somebody that was great at booking meetings, booked a lot of them, but they never showed up. And so like that can be a very alarming thing. And so what we did with that individual is we made him the captain of hold rate. And so every Monday, he would get the group together and brainstorm ideas on how they could increase their hold rate. Okay, well, what if we sent them a gift card the day of the meeting? What if we put them into a sequence to introduce them to the account executive? And so all of a sudden, that's top of mind for him. And then we also have him track it at the end of the week. What was everybody's hold rate? And so like he feels an incredible amount of ownership over that item that we're trying to improve. And then guess what? That number starts skyrocketing for him. So you can use this both ways. All right. So the other thing I do want to talk about a little bit is competition, because I think people are struggling with how to keep their teams motivated. And so on a daily basis, one thing that we do is we have them come in every morning and say, this is what I'm going to commit to the team. I'm going to book this many meetings. I've got this many running. I'm going to get this many opportunities out of it. And then we create visibility into the leaderboard, even on a spreadsheet, even remote, which helps them understand. And I always ask them at the end of every meeting, where do you stack rank on this list? Do you like where you're at? If so, keep doing what you're doing. If not, let's talk about it. And so they always know that that's where they stand, and it's very visible. And I think it's important to do that too. And then from a weekly basis, what we do is we select a specific weekly or a behavior that we're trying to drive. It could be an event that we're trying to drive attendance to or something along those lines. It could be a specific, we really need just meetings booked, or we really need to increase our hold rate this week. And then we can spiff off that. It's good to do like gift cards and that kind of stuff. Uber Eats gift cards are going like wildfire right now, which is great. But a lot of companies don't have a ton of discretionary budget. So other things that you can do for spiffs could be like coffee with an executive, like a virtual coffee with an executive. People get really hyped about that. And then on a monthly basis, I think it's really important to do a highlight reel of the previous month so that you can go back and say, like, this is how the team finished. These are some of the top contributors in different areas. It's a really easy win to also name a rookie of the month every month, because they get super pumped about it. It's something they can put on their resume, and it is completely free to you. So it's important to do that as well. And then on a quarterly basis, we do highest percent of quota does get to pick a prize. One more thing that we're doing from a team perspective. So it is important to try to figure out how you can integrate the teams and not just say like the highest, this person. You do want to make sure you're pulling in different people from different areas. So we just organized a team contest. And so we purposefully paired some of the higher performers with some of the newer folks. And then we assigned different point values to different things that we have them do. Scheduling meetings, getting opportunities, things along those lines. And then they can keep each other accountable. They cheer each other on. They can get very collaborative. And then they can also make sure that, they're staying on top of their own numbers, because they don't really let their team down. We are definitely running out of time, but this is the last thing I wanted to talk about. So the biggest takeaway I have here is it's not about resources. It's about being resourceful. When you go back to think about how I started this conversation today, new job, new team, new company, all the global pandemic and everything happening. And I had a lot of reasons to just say like, hey, this isn't going to work out. But I was so optimistic about the opportunity that was provided to me at Drift. And instead of thinking too much about what could go wrong, I started getting back to the basics. These are all things that SDR leaders should be doing on a daily basis anyway, and started thinking about connecting with the humans and just put the excuses aside and said, let's do this thing. So I think we're already way over time, and I'm so sorry, Vivian, but we do have some questions too.
Julianne, thank you so much for doing that. I did drop some questions that I collected from the chat box into the Q&A if you want to go ahead and dive into those.
Yeah, are we good on time for a little bit?
Yeah, you are pretty much the last session, so we're on your time.
All right, let's bring it home. All right, so Hayden wants to know if the new model of SDR AE alignment, how do you set territories and verticals? Okay, so the way that this works is the AEs have segments. So we have enterprise, we have mid-market, we have SMB. We do not have SDR support SMB. They do their own prospecting themselves. But in mid-market and enterprise, we align, the AEs have different territories. And then the SDRs fuel into those or bump up into those AEs. So from an SDR perspective, you may have accounts in Texas, you may have accounts in New York, you may have accounts in California, but everything that we're doing is on the phone anyway. The only thing I would say to be cautious of is call blitzes and time zones. So you could separate it out east and west. I actually think it's good to have accounts in different time zones because you can call at different parts of the day. But yeah, that's how we do that there. Hayden, let me know if you wanted me to expand on it at all. Otherwise, I'm going to move down to Sean. So how do you mark and track which accounts fall into the hit list, ICP, and testing zone? Okay. So we have a field in Salesforce that we use as ABM. And so what the AEs did at the beginning of the year is they looked at their book of business and said, like, what are my best accounts that I really, if we win this deal, like I'm going to say, like everybody's high-fiving, or at least at this point, virtually high-fiving. And so the AEs hand selected those with the helps of operations that had data to support why this should or should not be a hit list account. ICP, we base it off of industry as well as company size, and then also something called Alexa rank, which is kind of specific to Drift, but that's to make sure that they have enough website traffic to make sure that we're successful. So those are the big three things that we're looking for when we're defining ICP. And then testing zone is everything else. All right, looks like we have another question. Who defines which accounts fall into those zones? Is that, okay. Yeah, so operations actually had a lot to do with this in terms of like who defines it. Operations wanted to take the data that we had from last year, well, all the previous years, and help to understand where the, what our ICP was, right? And where we should be focusing. So operations had a lot to do with the separating up the target accounts. But as far as the hit list account goes, that was mostly on the AEs. And then I also ask, especially the more tenured SDRs, which we don't have a ton of them yet, but I do ask them to influence. So if an AE says like, hey, we're going to target these 5 companies this week, I want the SDR to be able to say, hey, I actually reached out to this person and, you know, it's not going to be a good fit for right now for whatever reason, but I think this account is really hot right now. And then you ask about demand gen here too. One thing that we encourage them to do during these one-on-ones is take a list of what accounts are showing some type of activity from an inbound perspective, whether they're attending our webinars, going to some of our virtual events. They may prioritize based on the interaction they're having with our brand. I'm just going to keep scrolling down. Vivian, if you see any other ones you want me to jump to, I can certainly do that. Otherwise, I'm just going to go one by one. Okay, next question from Mackenzie is, what time frame do you look at when calculating conversion rates? How often do you recalculate? I'm laughing because I do this like 3 times a day. Yeah, I really like the SDR funnel if you haven't gotten that sense from me yet. So I think it is really important to look at these numbers early and often. It is hard to say, you know, what the actual change is between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. But I do look at them often. I just have a spreadsheet that tracks everything from meetings booked to meetings held, and it it has an automatic calculator. But as far as like when I'm looking at what I want to coach towards, and what I want to evaluate or what I want to structure training around, I do that the third week of every month to plan for the following month. So in the example that I gave, we were identifying a bottleneck in our call conversion rate. And so that's the ratio between conversations held with a prospect on the phone to meeting scheduled. And so like that number was short or smaller than it needed to be for that time frame. And so the following month, that was the theme of the month. All right, moving right along. Thanks for everybody still hanging with us. I know we're a little over time, but hopefully you guys are getting some good nuggets out of this. Has the AE headcount also increased along with the 4x SDR growth? Yes and no. So yeah, yes, the AE headcount has increased, but not at the same rate as the SDRs. And so the reason being, Drift has built its brand on having such an amazing marketing engine. And so the SDR team is fairly new to that motion. And so the SDR team was implemented last year, 4 reps that were wildly successful, which is why they were able to, go and say, like, hey, we're going to grow this thing out. We need to get ahead of sales development and everything. And so like, yes, we have hired heads, but we've actually we've limited the amount of prospecting that the AEs have to do on their own behalf. And so it used to be that they had to do 100% of their prospecting, and then now they have to do less. And so that's continuing to, I'm showing you physically because it is still moving with how much prospecting they're doing on their own. All right, Oscar. Have these current times changed outbound versus inbound SDRs? The team has had to shift to outbound. Any tips and recommendations for the shift to outbound? Yeah, so like right when COVID hit, we stopped making phone calls, which was a very highly debated topic. If you spent any time on LinkedIn in that 2 or 3 week period, everyone had an opinion about it, but we did stop. And the reason that we did that is like we knew that we needed to give our prospects a little bit of breathing room because everybody's figuring out their own life in their personal lives. But then it reached a point where it's like everybody was ready to get back to work and get back to business, and businesses still need to run. People still need to sell, and people still have website traffic. So there was definitely a need for Drift as well. As far as like shifting to outbound, because we actually did the exact opposite. We're shifting from inbound to outbound now. Like I think the biggest thing is understanding what the numbers are, understanding how to identify your accounts, that the ones that you should focus on. Because from an inbound perspective, you're more doing like qualification, and from an outbound, like you have to control your ability to identify like what a good prospect looks like. And the messaging part is really tough too. It's tough to figure that out. The biggest recommendation I could give you here is test everything, A, B, C, D, E, test everything. And that way, you know what works. All right. I think that might've been the last question here. All right. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Vivian, you may have a couple words at the end, but thank you so much, especially for everybody who stuck with us through the end here. I really hope that this was fruitful for you. Would love if you guys connected with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to talk SDR shop. So if you have any questions at all, or just want to add each other to our networks, we'd love to be a resource for you all.
Thank you so much, Julianne, and thank you guys all so much for ending this virtual conference with a bang. We can't thank you enough. And also, we do have an August conference as well, and you can find that on our 10bound website. Also, just to echo what Julianne said, if you'd like to connect with her or anyone that you've spoken with or gone to their talks, just go into the speakers page there and then click on their bio, and everything will be there. But yeah, thank you guys so much, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your week going into your weekend. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Vivian.